Okay, today's video, we're going to talk about how to run a PMAX or shopping campaign on an international basis the correct way. For most of you guys, I'm going to assume you're in the US, and this would mean outside the US obviously, but this also could be for you guys that are not in the US trying to advertise in other countries as well. There's a very specific kind of, and should I say most ideal process for setting up the shopping campaign that you're running now, that you're probably already running, or PMAX campaign that you're already running, so that when you do go to another country, you're not violating any of Google's rules, and you just get the most maximum amount of sales and ROI out of those, international opportunities that you have to run your shopping slash, PMAX campaigns there, whether it's a country in a different language or not. I'm covering all that in today's video about how to work around all that, what's actually in the rules that you must follow, and to get the most value out of the opportunity in general. So with that said, I'll get directly into the content. So running any other Google Ads campaign in more than one country is actually obviously pretty easy to do. There's some considerations there. If you're advertising to someone that speaks another language, it can get sort of complicated. You need other sites, or you need a way to translate the site. And then potentially in the campaigns that you set up, you have to change the language settings so that you have people that speak XYZ language, and that your ads are all translated into that language, so that the people that are speaking a different language will see an ad and a landing page and all that, or a site that all matches up with the language they speak. And of course, in the targeting settings, that you point all the traffic towards that individual country that you're targeting. But for the most part, that's stuff that most of you guys probably could figure out rather easy if you're going international. The shopping slash PMAX campaigns, there's quite a few other elements, which is why I decided to make this video in specific. So you guys that are, if you found this video trying to figure out how to do international shopping slash PMAX campaigns, this gives you the information I never had when I first started to do it, to figure out what I needed to ultimately do. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to give you, instead of talking about theory and all that on this particular video, I'm going to go through the actual process that I go through exactly to set up an international shopping slash PMAX campaign for our clients to get the maximum results out of those campaigns where we got to guarantee results for our clients on their campaigns. So with that said, we'll get into it. The first step here, out of all the steps, which technically these could be done in order or not, it doesn't have to be done certainly in this exact order, but the first thing to mention here is a lot of people ask when they're starting out, they say, do I need multiple product feeds for my shopping slash PMAX campaigns if I'm going to operate in multiple countries? And the answer to that is no, you do not, unless you're going to be marketing to people in different countries that speak other languages other than the language that you speak, that your site basically is, and that you started out perhaps or potentially doing shopping in the first place, or PMAX in the first place. So if everything is supposed to be targeting one language, you only need one feed. So that's the first thing to mention. So though if you're targeting internationally and you're targeting countries that don't really speak English, of course most countries, there's some people who speak English. It's the international universal language of business. But for instance, a good example is Canada. Canada technically has English and French. So if you were going to target, you could just target everybody in Canada that speaks English and just say, screw the people who speak French, I don't care about them, or whatever. You could do that. But if you wanted to get the most money you can, which is what this channel is about, making more money with PPC, you'd want to target the French people separately. That way you just maximize your level or number of opportunities. And as I'm going to talk about later, that's actually more profitable than targeting the English people because there's less competition there. Your competition, if they're targeting Canada residents from the US, they're probably not going to go through the trouble of targeting people who speak French. They're going to say, screw it, like, most other people, because it's, a ball of wax that they don't want to, get into, cut open, whatever. And they skip over it, whereas anything that works, that the consumer needs and wants you to do, and your competition is not going to be willing to do in a competitive market, that's going to generally make you more money with PPC. And for what it's worth, it's not that hard to market to people in other languages. There's, with the given number of tools and resources out there to do it, it's rather actually easy. So at the very least, you probably will keep it simple and you'll just target other countries that speak English / target other countries that speak another language. Their primary language is not English, but the people that are in those countries that speak English, that's what you're going to start off doing, because you need one product feed. There's less moving parts. Once you kind of master that, then you can get into targeting people that speak other languages. So, and as a side note, before I get into this other thing, the second item on my list here, we had, a campaign that we targeted in the very competitive space of travel insurance before. And targeting people that want travel insurance in the U.S. was so competitive. A lot of insurance fields, when you're talking about the mainstream insurance that not businesses but like regular consumers need and millions of people buy, so competitive to the point where you basically can't make money anymore. Why? There's some key markets like that where I don't care how good your strategy is. You follow all the stuff that I give you on this channel to do to kick people's asses at PPC in your market. You're not going to beat them, because if you're in a market like that where there's billion-dollar companies advertising, there's a good chance those people advertising don't give a shit if whether or not that even makes money or not. They hired a PPC company, gave them a budget. They're not tracking true ROI, in terms of how many, tracking how many leads maybe they got. They're not tracking whether those leads turned into sales and how much and all that. And so they could run their campaigns at a loss and you can't. And that's just how it is. If you're in a market like that, you're kind of screwed. But if you opened up, and looked at the different opportunities, thought you were to think outside the box like we were, we went ahead and sold people the travel insurance that are outside the U.S. And because the client we had could do it, and it worked real well targeting people in other countries, because other people, and particularly as it ties into what I just said, in other languages, other countries aren't going to change all their marketing material into another language and then sell internationally. So they could be the one person that's selling internationally to people who still are searching for this kind of thing, so they could get a little bit more revenue. In this situation, it was our key to actually get anything going, because the U.S. market was too competitive. But targeting Mexico and changing the ad and the landing page to Spanish, and just targeting people who speak Spanish with the ads and telling Google we want people only that speak Spanish to see this, which is what you would do, worked amazingly well. And then we started to break that out into other languages and other countries, and that was a scalable campaign. Whereas targeting English people in the U.S., it just wasn't. So we were willing to do what other people weren't willing to do in the market, and just because somebody has a lot of money doesn't mean they're willing to do some of these other things like this. And that's your opportunity, so to say, to make abnormal returns, or returns beyond what most people are going to get in that niche, if you will. But and that's what this is about here. Targeting internationally, you're going to do what your competition's not willing to do. Most competition won't even want to ship internationally because it's a pain in the ass. So they won't compete with you internationally. And with shopping / PMAX campaigns, those are generally more profitable than search campaigns. So what you have in the US probably works well. So you, of course, want to take these opportunities in international markets. In international markets, it's less competitive. The cost per click's less. You'll probably get a better return that you're going to get in the US. So you definitely would want to do this. And with that, if you're going to target internationally at all outside the US, if you're a US business, you probably get a great return because none of your competition is doing it. And if you start to transfer your content on your ad and landing pages / site into another language, you're going to get even more results because even less people are willing to do that. So anyway, some food for thought as it comes to doing this stuff. If it looks a little bit daunting or time consuming, it truly is worth it. If I'm running an e-commerce shop, I'm selling internationally. In fact, back in 2005 to 2009, when I did run e-commerce, and I wasn't any kind of consultant for companies or anything, we ran international. International was half of our sales, literally speaking, in the performance auto parts space. Because the competition's less, also the cost per click is also less. People are willing to spend less money per click than they are in the US. So ended up being half of our sales, and without it, we just wouldn't have nearly the company we would have had otherwise, because we dominated the international space as well as the domestic. Anyway, back to the topic at hand here. So you create a product feed for every language that you're going to target. If you're going to target one language, one product feed. But to go along with that, to mention here, you need to have other versions of your site if you are going to target people in other languages. In other words, you can't just have one product feed for English, one for Spanish, one for Russian, whatever, and then not change any of the stuff on your site. Not because Google is going to necessarily disallow it, but it's not going to convert very well. If you see, I mean, obviously, if you saw an ad in English and you got to a site and it was all in Spanish, are you going to buy? No. And to build upon that point, a lot of people will be able to. They'll have a drop-down selector in the top right or top left of their e-commerce site or whatever, allowing people to select what language they want the site converted in, and that's too much trouble, to the point where if somebody gets to your site and they see it's all in English and they speak Russian, they're probably not going to look for that. Some will, but not enough. The key is not enough to get to where the campaign's profitable, or it's not going to be nearly as profitable, at the very, very least, as if you just had the whole site in Russian for them. If you're going to have, the shopping ad ultimately shows up in Russian for them because you have a Russian product feed. So having a drop down for the user to select their language, which some people, people outside the US that are not speaking English are going to be used to using a drop down like that because, if they're shopping in the US, they've just done this before. But you'll do better, much better, if instead of doing the drop down thing where you got to manually select the language when you get to the site so you don't get a high bounce rate, do a pop-up that says, "You look like you're from Russia." Translate site into Russian, and then an OK button or cancel button. That's much, much better, because obviously at that point, they're not going to be, the people that aren't accustomed to going to the drop down and selecting Russian, they're not going to be confused. And confusion is, the more confusion you have in terms of the sales process, the lower the ROI you're going to get. This eliminates a lot of the potential confusion, therefore raises your ROI. So I would do that over just having the manual drop down where they have to literally change it into Russian, which means you're going to have a plugin or something on your site to do it, which if you're using something like Shopify, this is easy. There's simple, out of the box plugins that you can install on Shopify that it allows you to do that exact thing. You get language auto detect, which is what it's basically called. There's several solutions out there that allow you to have a pop-up like that, or it could just automatically turn all the site into Russian if you're from Russia. So for the most part, when you know that 97% of people in Russia speak Russian, just automatically turning it into Russian, if you're in Russia, you probably will do better that way than saying, translate this into Russian, and giving them the option to turn it into Russian or not, so that the 3% of people who speak English also get what they want, if you get my point. So you always got to weigh, okay, I'm trying to cater to everybody, but is it better to cater to most of the people really well than to cater to everybody half-ass, basically? And so in that type of situation, I would certainly want to just turn the whole site into Russian for the user if they're from Russia. And same thing if they're in Germany, the whole site turns into German automatically. It just translates all the text and so forth. So anyway, along with your product feed, you got to translate that into another language and have one product feed per language. You got to have some sort of software on your site that's going to change the site into that language as well, so that when you start sending the Russian traffic to your site, your site turns into Russian for the user as well, so the campaigns actually pay off. And so, but respectively tying what I said before a minute ago with what I just said here, the amount of people there'll be very few people who compete with you internationally, and even less that want to actually translate their ads and landing pages into Russian or another language other than what their site's made to be set up in English or whatever. Just installing a plugin which gives you the capability to translate your whole site into another language automatically for the user. It's almost no work to get another avenue for sales coming in that basically has no competition in it. So it's actually really nice opportunity installing a plugin like that and starting targeting international traffic that's ultimately searching and looking for you in another language. Another tie-in to that is you could use one of these plugins that automatically translates all the text, and that, for the most part, due to how good these plugins are today, and they usually tap into the Google Translate API, that you're going to do pretty well just with that alone. But if you were doing good with that, you certainly could do better, most likely, having custom domains for each country that you want to advertise to. So in other words, what I'm going to basically do is I'm going to start out, probably would cut out this step with my knowledge, but hypothetically, if I'm putting myself in your shoes, I'm going to test out using the auto detect and translate language plugin on my Shopify site, or if I have a different, e-commerce site platform, I'm going to probably there'll be a plugin available for that, as long as it's a halfway mainstream platform. But with that, if I'm doing well, I'm going to take the countries that don't speak English or what have you, we're getting most of the sales, and I'm going to start, branching off and making. And if I'm selling I have my domain is cooltoys.com, I'm going to have, and I'm noticing out of all the international countries that I'm selling to, that's selling the best. Of course, usually it's going to be like, if you're in the US now, it's going to be Canada and Australia and South Africa and UK before some of these other non-English speaking countries, because they have a higher income. But realistically, or even after those, if I see after the Five Eye countries, which is Australia, UK, Canada, Australia, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK are the 4 ones that usually where you have the highest sales outside the US. Then South Africa. After that, most countries aren't speaking English. If I see, let's say Russia is the number 6 most, highest revenue producing country outside my country of the US that we're selling to internationally, I'm going to take my whole site, I'm going to go to a professional Russian translator, I'm going to translate every word on the site to Russian, and then I'm going to put that on a separate domain. Instead of cooltoys.com, I'm going to put it on cooltoys.ru for Russia, is what the country extension would be for that, so that I don't have to have a half-ass auto translation of the site, which we all know the text and how it's written on our site, the sales copy, is going to dictate how much sales we get. And what if the whole site was written by somebody who is bilingual? The site would suck, right? And even though like Google Translates came way beyond where they were when they first started out, it's actually really damn good. It's not perfect. So if you manually translate your site, create a second domain, and then advertise that second domain, which you can advertise as many domains as you want in Google Ads, you're going to end up with more sales from Russia than if you were to just use the auto detect, auto translate plugin for your e-commerce site. I know this because we've done this before. And so you could just, to keep it simple though, you could start with the simple stuff. You could start targeting, if you're right now you're targeting, US, you could start targeting the English countries, and then you could start targeting the non-English countries by using a auto translate plugin on your site. And then your countries that are doing well, non-English countries that are doing well, you could start making dedicated sites for those countries and then start sending traffic for those particular sites there and get even more results. So you could, instead of just tackling everything at once, you could just take the money you make from one, parlay it into another and another. And this is how you end up selling and making tons of money at what you're doing. It's small incremental changes like that add up and add up and add up to where you're making the millions of dollars and you're just crushing everybody in your niche. So everybody just wants one ad and one thing to do. The real fortunes are made when you stack up 100 small things like we're talking about today, and they're all working for you because you put the time and work in. Anyway, as far as the topic at hand here, once you set up a product feed for each language and got your site, translated one way or another, so that people who don't speak English, if you're targeting non-English speaking or in a different language than of course, that your site's, in now, or you're marketing your stuff in now, you are going to update the shipping methods on Google Merchant Center, which is another requirement that Google has. You got to go when you're logged into Google Merchant Center, you're going to go under Tools, and then Shipping and Returns, and then for each country you are servicing. So if you're going to target Canada, you need to put your Canada shipping policies. If you're going to target Australia, you need to put your Australia shipping policies, and so forth. So every single country outside the US you're targeting, you need to list what your shipping and return, your shipping policies are, not your return. Return can be the same. You have to have a special return country policy for every country. So so far we've covered, you get your product feed set up for each language. You get your site translated for each language that you're going to ultimately target. Then you're going to set up your shipping policies for every country you're going to target, not every language, but every country. Then we go into the next step, which is update. You need to have an update of each product feed under feed, settings, and targeted countries. So in Google Merchant Center, for every product feed that you have now, maybe it's one because you're targeting one language, maybe it's multiple because you're targeting multiple languages, but regardless of how many product feeds you have, you're going to click on your feed. Obviously you can only click on one at a time, but you click on your first feed, and then you go to settings after you've clicked on that feed from Google Merchant Center, and then you're going to go to targeted countries and click on that, and make sure you have listed the countries that you're going to target. So if you just have one feed because you're targeting only English-speaking countries and people that are speaking English in those countries, then in that under that feed, and then under settings, and then under targeted countries, you're going to list every country you're going to ultimately target outside the US or outside the country that you're ultimately targeting now, or in general, you just basically are going to list every country you're targeting. If you have different product feeds for different languages, then like if you had one product feed just for Russian, under feed settings, targeted countries for that product feed, you would just obviously select Russia itself. And so as far as Google Merchant Center is concerned, they want you to update your shipping policies for each country, and then they want you under your feeds to tell them which feeds are for which countries, basically. Okay? That's the two things you need to do for Google Merchant Center in order to get your Google Merchant Center set up and ready so that you can advertise through Google Ads your shopping campaign or PMAX campaign to international countries. All right? Okay, but beyond that, there's some other considerations here to get right, totally right. Number 4, you're going to create unique campaigns for each language, then select the language under the language settings of those campaigns. So basically, what I would certainly absolutely recommend to you is not just make one campaign, even if you're targeting just one language. So if you're just targeting all English-speaking countries and you have one product feed, I wouldn't make one product feed, one shopping/PMAX campaign that targets all countries together in that one campaign. Why? Because each country is going to perform so much differently than other countries that you want to be able to monitor quickly and easily the stats that you're getting for each country. And ultimately, not to say you couldn't do it all in one campaign that targets all your English-speaking countries, because it will still basically work. But the way that I at least prefer to do it is going to be in separate campaigns, so I can set different budgets and all that for each campaign. And if you've been running PMAX or shopping for a while, all the history on that that old campaign is going to make it so that they prefer the countries in which they have the most familiarity with, and it'll take longer, so to say, to get the new countries spooled up. So I'm just going to do a new country by itself. I'm going to run it at a loss to get it spooled up faster, so to say, because if you set the target ROAS bid really, really low, it'll get you more clicks quick, and then eventually I'll turn the target ROAS bid to what I actually want to get as a ROAS goal, or ROI, ROAS being the same thing as ROI if you don't know that. But so I can get things spooled up quicker for that other country, and ultimately, you'll notice that you're getting a decent return. You'll be able to at a glance see the return you're getting from Australia versus US by looking at the campaigns menu. That's at least the way that I like it. You could put it all in the one campaign by itself if you want. If all those countries you're targeting, they're all speaking one language, and you're targeting people that are speaking that one language within it. Of course, if you set up if you do separate campaigns itself, you'll want to you'll certainly want to select under the language settings of that campaign the language in which your product feed is in and your site is in, if you will, but more specifically your product feed. So if you set up for instance, if you're targeting only US now and you're going to get into targeting Canada, okay, I would be setting up a separate PMAX campaign, because I usually do PMAX over shopping, because PMAX does better than shopping as long as you don't have any ad assets in it, but just your product feed, which if you don't know about that, you should look up feed only PMAX campaigns, and you can watch my video about that. But with the PMAX campaign I'm going to run, I would set up another PMAX campaign just for Canada. And then within that, I would make sure under the language settings to put English, so that people that are in Canada will only see my ad if they speak English. And if you're going to do one for a campaign for Russia, obviously, a PMAX campaign for Russia by itself, then under the language settings, you would have to put Russian. And so if the countries that you're targeting, they all speak the same language as the language that your site's naturally in now, then you would be able to have the option at least to put all those countries into one campaign. But as soon as you start getting into targeting other countries or that speak another language, or people that speak another language within that country itself, such as the French people in Canada, if you're targeting the French people in Canada, you would need a separate campaign. You wouldn't be able to put that in your existing PMAX campaign. Why? Because you need to put under the language settings the language in which the campaign's supposed to be set up for. So if you're trying to target people that speak French in Canada, then you put under the language settings French, so that it doesn't show up for Canadians who don't speak French. And for the ones that do speak French, your ads will show up. And of course, that campaign will pull from the product feed that's set up for French only, or people who speak French, if you got my point here. And so that what I just mentioned ties into this next thing, which is you choose the country or part of the country which speaks that language. So obviously, if back to my previous example about targeting the French people in Canada, because you're targeting somebody, we're assuming that, going back to my previous example, our primary site is listed in English. We're promoting our products to French people or French-speaking people in Canada. So we would set up a separate campaign which pulls from our French translated product feed. And in the language settings, it's going to target French, and which under the location settings, it's going to target Canada as a whole. Or you could do targeting the part of the Canada that mainly just speaks French, which is like Quebec mostly, and you could, to make it even less likely to have slack in your campaign, so to say. Because obviously, the more slack we can get rid of, the higher our ROI can go, because that's how all PPC works. Ads shown to people who don't need or want what we have makes our ROI go down, because we're paying for that ad space whether they click or not, and whether it's called pay-per-click or not. How much you pay per click directly is linked to your click-through rate on your ad. So why not just target, if this is supposed to be targeting French people, why don't we just target the places that mainly have 98% of the French people? That would be a smarter thing than targeting Canada-wide for that reason. So anyway, if you're just targeting Canada, though, and people that speak English in Canada, obviously we just target Canada as a whole. And so you would have if you're doing it my way at least, a new PMAX campaign targeting Canada under the language settings, put English, and would target the same product feed we're using to target the US people, since the people that speak English, people speak English in the US and our site's in English, so we don't need a separate product feed just for Canada. And so And if it wasn't clear just by what I have described already, like I said, you need a different product feed for every different language of people that you're going to be targeting. So with that, the product feed itself is all translated into a different language. That's why you need a different product feed for each language. So if you're targeting people who speak Russian, then that product feed, everything on it is translated into Russian. And so when you set up then your PMAX campaign, then you're going to select, pull from that Russian translated product feed for this campaign. Under the language settings, it's marked to target people who speak Russian, and then geographically, it's pointed as people that of course, are in Russia, because I don't know where else people that speak Russian would be necessarily. If they were in different parts of the world, you could technically, it's good for anybody who speaks Russian. We could do, Russia and then this country and this country. Obviously, for Spanish, if we create one product feed just for Spanish, we could have a campaign just all Spanish-speaking countries. And then that's what we do, is target every country that speaks Spanish, put under the location settings, Spanish. And so what it's going to do is target all these countries that primarily speak Spanish. And then if they type in Google in Spanish, Google's going to pick up this person who wants the results in Spanish. So then it'll show your shopping ad, which is on the shopping feed, that's Spanish only. And then of course they get to your site, and like I said, they're going to probably, if you followed my advice, see all the content in Spanish that's on the site. And then now you've got something that will work. So anyway, that's basically what you're going to do there for the whole thing. And so if the culmination of basically everything I said, it's not so much about targeting other countries. It's, if you're going to go at least all the way with this and target everybody internationally, it's targeting, ultimately you'll have separate campaigns that target people who speak different languages. There should be a campaign, ultimately, or forced to basically do. There'll be a campaign just for English speaking, one for Spanish speaking, one for Russian, one for German, and so forth. And then because under the language settings, you can put what language, if the person is using XYZ language, that it should pull from this campaign. If they use this other language, they should pull from this other campaign. That would be absolutely the way that I would set it up. In that, and that's the way you have to set it up. But respectively, in the campaign names, then you would just list the name of the campaign would just be like PMAX dash, Spanish. So you could, at a quick glance, you could see, okay, each campaign, what product feed it promotes, if you will. And that's kind of the best, easiest way to kind of organize things, so to say. Even though I said earlier, even if I was just targeting people that speak English worldwide, I would have separate campaigns for each country. I still certainly do that. But if you have different languages that you're targeting, then at that point, then I would break my campaigns up by language spoken. And then all the English-speaking people, if you will, could be put in one campaign. Or, just for the English-speaking countries, you could have still a campaign for each English-speaking country, and then a campaign for every other language to go along with that, as a part of a kind of a hybrid model in terms of organizing and how you structure your campaigns. But those would be your basic options there. That's ultimately how you're going to do it overall. Now, there's a last thing to mention here, which is you're going to select the product feed that has the country selected in it and in the right language. So, respectively here, going back to what I was saying before about the product feed itself, if you're going to set up, in terms of just settling this, how it has to be structured, your Russian campaign, so I recommended that if you're going to target other languages, that you should just basically essentially have a product, you have your product feed set up for Russian itself, and then your campaigns that you set up for all these other languages, you should just have one campaign for every other language, Russian, German, and all that. For your Russian campaign on Google Ads, it's going to pull from your Russian product feed. You'll just have to make sure your Russian product feed under the, what I was talking about here, under the feed settings, that Russian product feed also is Russia selected on that product feed itself. Otherwise, your campaign won't work. So you got to have, the product feed translated into Russian, but then also under the settings, you have to make sure Russian is selected. In the Spanish example that I gave you, since so many countries have Spanish-speaking people, you would set up your Spanish product feed. Under that Spanish product feed, under the targeted countries, under settings of that product, so under the settings menu, under that particular product feed, you would want to select and put all the different Spanish-speaking countries, so that when you go to set up your PMAX Spanish campaign in Google Ads, when you're going to select that and you want to target all these Spanish-speaking countries, that product feed is basically set up so that it's set up correctly for that campaign. So in other words, you got your Google Ads here. Let's say we have Google Ads here and we got Google Merchant Center over here. Google Ads is going to target, we're going to have a campaign that targets all Spanish-speaking people. And under the language settings option, under the settings of that campaign, of that PMAX campaign, we have Spanish chosen. And then under the location settings, we're going to have all Spanish-speaking countries where Spanish is the primary language. In PMAX, we're going to have a Spanish-speaking product feed, which has all the stuff on the product feed translated into Spanish. And then under the feed settings, it's going to have all the Spanish-speaking countries listed under the feed settings. And ultimately, under the feed settings, all the countries listed under that Spanish-speaking or Spanish-translated product feed will be all the same countries in terms of the location targeting on that same Spanish campaign on Google Ads, so that it matches up directly one-to-one. And that's how you would set it up, so that what you're doing on the Google Ads side matches what's legal to do and you're supposed to do on the Google Merchant Center side, okay? So that, ultimately, because you have to create essentially one product feed for each language, it only makes sense to have a Google Ads PMAX campaign set up for each language as well. You see what I mean there? Because if you start listing one per country, it doesn't make as much logical sense to necessarily do that. Sort of thing. It makes more sense to just have one campaign per language itself, for the most part. And also given that some countries have more than one language, and so if you're going to capitalize on that as well, being able to sell to people who speak French or that are in Canada, technically you should be listing and have separate campaigns by language, not by country, since ultimately you can only choose one language in the language settings on a campaign. So if you wanted to target French and English in Canada, you couldn't do it with just one campaign. You would need a Canada, at the very least, you would need a Canada English and a Canada French, because you can only choose one language in the language settings. Not only that, but you can only choose one product feed. So therefore, structuring and listing all your campaigns by language is the way to do it, unless you're going to target one language by itself, and then you have the option to do one campaign by country and have your campaigns by country. But in that case, like I said, you could have one campaign with all the countries targeted outside the US or outside your country listed within it, as long as all the people are speaking the same language itself. Because under the location settings, you can just choose that same language, and the product feed you're pulling from is all just the same language, so therefore you can get away with that. As kind of a final note about this, since you're going to create one product feed for each language, if you're going to target people that speak other languages as well, to get the full amount of sales you can get out of running international PMAX/shopping campaigns, you'll have to figure out how you're going to be able to physically build other product feeds in other languages other than the language that you've already set up your initial product feed for your home language in there. And, and I mentioned on other videos before about how to do product feed setup the best way, best practices. There's two main ways to set up a product feed. There's doing an automated feed, which you have basically like an XML file that is produced by your shopping campaign that gets fed directly into Google Merchant Center. And so that when stuff goes in and out of stock or the prices change, that within the next 24 hours, your computer a script on your computer or on your website's web hosting will update Google Merchant Center automatically, or you can do what is called a manual feed, which is just basically a spreadsheet that you give to Google Merchant Center that lists all your products and your pricing and everything else that they ask for. And so if you're doing manual product feeds, then this can be really easy. You just take your product feed as is that you have for English or your home country, you take it to different translators or a translation company to make it even easier on yourself, and say, I want everything on this product feed to be translated into Russian and Spanish and all that, and then upload all your other product feeds to Google Merchant Center, and then bang, you have your product feed for each language. You can go under the feed settings, make sure the right country is selected. You can go under your feed settings and make sure each feed that you uploaded has the right countries listed, for that particular so-called language that the product feed's translated into, whether that's one country or multiple countries, because that language is the primary language in multiple countries that you're going to be soon targeting with your PMAX/shopping campaigns. If you're in the situation where you're using an automated product feed, which most of you guys do that have a lot of products, or products that go in and out of stock a lot, or the prices, mainly if you have a lot of products, because if you have a few products, if you go in and out of stock, you can change things manually, and it's reasonable, halfway reasonable to do that. If you have a lot of products, you need an automated feed because things are changing too much too quickly. It's too hard to manage updating Google Merchant Center manually which you would have to do, through your manual feed, you have to update your spreadsheet every time a product goes in and out of stock or changes its prices, or where you're changing pricing. So if you're using an automated, which those product feeds, if you haven't done it already, it's usually a plugin that you put on your e-commerce site. That it's a product feed plugin that allows you to take all the, basically all the products on your site, post them to Google Merchant Center so that you could run shopping/PMAX campaigns on Google Ads. That with that, you're going to have to set up and have multiple product feeds coming in and with your plugin. And some plugins are not going to allow you to have the flexibility to essentially do what you want to do, to where of course what you're pulling from your site can be translated into another language and then posted to Google Ads, so that you have an automatically updating product feed that updates with the changes that you make on your back end of your site, with the pricing changes and the when stuff goes in and out of stock. And so if you do get into the point where you certainly want to take my advice and go fully into this, one product feed for every language, so that you could target people that aren't even speaking English to get the maximum international sales you can. You're going to have to find a special product plugin. You probably have to change product plugins that has the capability to translate, auto-translate the details from the base language you have to Google Ads before information's passed Google Merchant Center, so that information on your site that's in one language gets passed to Google Merchant Center in another language, or will let you have an option to put a second product feed in another language, and then when prices and things other than the description, all that change, it does not change the description, all that. It will only change the pricing and the stock issues, because ultimately most product feed plugins, it'll look at the description and all that and see if that's changed. If you've updated your description, it'll change the description on your product feed, which obviously if let's say your site's in English, that's not going to work for your Russian product feed. You need to be able to have it either translate into Russian before it posts to Google Merchant Center, or it's got to be able to update everything else besides the title and description, which you would need to have translated into Russian. So you got to have a special product plugin to be able to do this in other languages. There's product plugins or product feed plugins that will certainly do that. I don't have any specific recommendations for you here, but at least you just you know what you have to do basically. And so I also don't like to make recommendations for plugins like that, because what's good today isn't good a year from now, because things change, things break. I don't want to be hosed by somebody here who I recommended a plugin and it ended up turning to shit 2 years later. So, but you know what you need to search for to do this. The manual way of using the manual product feed is by far the easiest way to do this. And you may, at least at the testing stage, before you prove it to yourself, you may just want to use a manual product feed and then try to get an automated product feed solution for, you know, your other feeds that are supposed to be dedicated to other languages later on, as a potential just way about going and doing this. If you're not so-called sold on this potential concept for your exact business. But for most businesses, this is going to make a ton of money. In fact, as far as the results, in general, we're doing this for other clients, which we don't do it all the time because the client also we got to get cooperation from the client. If it's my business, hell yeah, I'm doing this. Because I know from running e-commerce back in the day for our company, it worked fantastic. And have done it since then for some other companies. The point is here, really, when you sell outside, even if you're just, I'll assume you guys are doing business in the US. If you're doing business in the US already, if you step outside to sell in Canada and Australia and New Zealand, that right there, you could generally get double the ROI than you're going to get in the US because there's way less competition there. There's less competition, which lowers the cost per click bids, the bidding or the amount per click you have to pay to get shown. And therefore your returns basically double. It's actually, cost per click is even less than 50% of the, you're going to pay less than half of what you're paying in the US, generally speaking. But what also happens though, is the conversion rate on your site's not going to be as high as it is in the US because people have to pay higher shipping rates. And so, even though they have to pay higher shipping and the conversion rates are lower, the cost per click is so damn low in comparison to the super hyper competitive US, where most people are going to only want to sell to because shipping internationally is a pain in the ass. It makes up for it and then some, to where you're still getting double the ROI outside the country that you could get inside the US. Or at the very, very least, you're going to get just as good of ROI, even though the conversion rate's less because you're going to be paying less per click outside the US in the other, like UK, Australia, New Zealand. And then, for different businesses, you're going to get away with targeting more countries. Some businesses, you're not going to be able to make money in, Asia, Africa, some of these other places that have lower average income levels. But some of you guys are going to do extremely well. And it's all relative. What, it costs, if it costs you $1.50 a click in the US to show up in shopping, it may only cost you 5 cents a click in, Russia, for instance. So for that reason, you have to explore this opportunity. But going back to what I was saying about the results here, your ROI will typically be upwards of double outside the US, and you're going to find inside the US as a whole when targeting other English-speaking countries if you're already selling in English on your site with your existing PMAX campaigns or shopping campaigns. If you're going to go to non-English speaking countries and do that whole ball of wax, where you got to have separate product feeds for each language, and you got to set up some sophisticated thing on your site using a special plugin so that your product feed can your products from your site can be sent to Google Merchant Center in another language. You can get 4x the ROI on those non-English speaking countries, or even doing something as simple as selling to the French speaking people in Canada using a French product feed and a campaign that's set to target people who start searching in French, so that the people that are speaking French will get served from that specific campaign that's tied to that specific French translated product feed. And so there's massive, massive opportunity going and do the non-English speaking countries that are not speaking English in those countries. And of course, you could target those other countries and in English and still get some sales, and actually get quite a few sales. But you could get even more sales targeting those other non-English speaking countries and then of course marketing to them in their own primary language, which I mentioned that you should also do to extract the maximum amount of sales and value you can out of PMAX in other countries than the home country that you're already selling in. So you can basically essentially do three things. You could target, actually there's kind of 4 levels to this. You could target if you're doing in the U.S., you could target Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, those 4 countries, and that's going to be the first stop for most of you. Then you could, of course, sell to other countries that around the world that they mostly speak other languages, but target the people that are speaking English and searching in English in those other countries and probably get some good results there. Then you could get into targeting people that are not speaking English, but in wealthier countries, like the French people in Canada, for instance, right? Then you could get into targeting people who don't speak English and are not in high-income countries and try to see what you can do there. Already knowing that the cost per click is like 5 cents a click in most of these countries that, outside, Australia, Canada, UK, US, New Zealand, your cost per click is almost nothing in comparison because these people don't use Google as much and people don't know, about Google ads, which makes it like barely cost anything. It all is, so the cost is way, way less. Your conversion rates aren't quite as good, of course. People don't have as much money. They're less kind of relaxed about buying online, but the cost of the traffic is so ridiculously cheap. Why wouldn't you try? So anyway, you can decide where to go. In general, though, outside the Five countries, Canada, US, or sorry, if you're in US, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, you're going to be able to double your ROI as you're going to get in the US. You start targeting other countries, even in English, but but particularly when they don't speak English, you could get upwards of 4 times the return that you're going to get in the US. Now, you may not be able to get as much sales as the US, obviously, but the whole great thing about like running a PMAX campaign, which I mentioned in this video, I recommend doing that over shopping. You could set your target ROAS to whatever you want, or target ROI, if you want to call it that, to whatever you want. So ultimately, it'll just get you the sales at the ROI you want. It may not be very much for a certain country, but you're getting a trickle. And when you're getting a trickle from 190 countries, it adds up to a lot, to the point where you should be able to double your sales by going and attacking the international market, people that are both speaking English and not speaking English, and just sucking up all possible demand that way. Most businesses should be able to double your sales if you're going to go and do that. Of course, the drawback is you're going to have to deal with a bunch of more so-called hassle to ship internationally. But in my opinion, it's not that much more hassle. Of course, you got to fill out custom forms and all that stuff, but to turn away half of my potential sales to not deal with the little bit of extra work it takes to ship internationally, it's not worth it. As a quick thing about that, the other drawback about doing international that people don't like is if you try to ship using the cheaper free shipping options, some of these countries, they got the postal systems in those countries will just steal your products if you're selling anything halfway valuable. So what you got to do is you got to send it via airmail, and that airmail may be too expensive to be worth it. And so, but if you're just starting out in this, my point is you may be saying, well, it costs $100 to ship my product using airmail, so this isn't going to work because I sell a $50 item, but I can use the ground shipping, where basically you're sending it through the U.S. postal system and then it goes to that foreign country's postal system. If you're in a third world country, don't do it. Your shit will get stolen. And not only that, U.S. Postal Service won't guarantee that the product gets there. They'll literally tell you, once it gets to another country, you're out of luck. Whereas if you're doing airmail, you can get a literal delivery confirmation. So when somebody, asks for and says that they didn't get it, you could say it was delivered, here's the delivery confirmation, versus when they say they don't get it because the post office man stole it, you have no choice but to ship it again. And if you choose to ship it again every single time that they say they didn't get it, you'll be shipping it again a lot of times. I know that from, again, being in business doing this exact type of thing. So anyways, just some other food for thought on this stuff, getting into international marketing, advertising for e-commerce brand. itself. So hope you enjoyed this video. I have a lot of other videos on this channel about other PPC money making strategies. If you like this one, you want to learn more about how to make money with Google ads, Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, and so forth, subscribe to this channel. If you like the video, I'd appreciate it if you would give this video a like so I can get the video out to other people as well that like to be able to run international campaigns and don't want to hear the other crap advice that's out there about this. And it's all in the same place, everything you need. So I'd really appreciate that for the algorithm. I also, by the way, have a blog at guaranteedppc.com/blog. So if you watch this channel and you like this channel, you'll also like the blog because I've written that out, all that information by myself. And I go into detail how to set up campaigns like international campaigns that I was explaining here today, and go into detail on it so you know how to actually get things done. Whereas on this channel, I go on, at a fairly high level about stuff. On that blog, I go into detail on stuff. So it's a great supplementary info source that will help you out making money with your PPC ads. If you have any questions about anything as it comes to international shopping or PMAX campaigns, ask away. Just leave me a comment below. I get back to every single person who leaves me a comment on this channel, usually within a couple days' time. As the last thing I want to mention, we have a brand new program at our firm where we're offering campaigns. We've worked in hundreds of markets now, markets where we've gotten fantastic results. We've had companies or sole entrepreneurs come to us and say, they're trying to get their campaigns to work in this market, and I say something like, "Oh, that market's not very good. You should be, if you got these resources, you should just do this, similar but different business. We've already got the campaign we ran in that business. It's for this other guy in another geographic market. It's making $5 million a year. You start out the same business in your market, you'll make that same money. And you won't have to go through the process of building up a campaign, testing certain things. You could just use the exact, carbon copy template of what already works and hurdle over all the learning process you have to go through to get it set up for your own business." Or we've had some people where they'll take that advice that I gave them, open up a business, outsource all the work to another partner in their local area, a plumber, a foundation repair company, a roofer, take 5 or 10% of the revenue off the top for themselves, and they don't have to do any work, and had a business that's basically a business in a box that they could be, ultimately be used with almost no knowledge whatsoever. You're taking our exact campaigns that work on a, slapping it, on a website that you put together that you own, and you got a business already. So anyway, if you're interested in that type of thing, reach out to our firm. We've got both product and service campaigns that are running in one geographic market, and if you're in another geographic market where you won't cross paths, you can get the same results they already are getting in another market. It's almost like a franchise, so to say. And we can tell you what results you're going to basically get before you even start. We may also have a campaign that we've already ran like that in your exact market. So it makes no sense to at least not reach out and ask if we not gotten results in your market already. So you don't have to do all the hard work that we did and spend all the money we did to learn the exact configuration that kills it in that market. But anyway, beyond that, I'll leave you with that information. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in my next video where we have another great strategy for you there as well. See you later.